only looked through the window because someone had left a folded piece of paper on my porch. I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't heard a car. One moment, the porch was empty. The next, there it was. A single white sheet folded into a perfect square. No envelope, no writing, nothing. It was exactly 12:17 a.m. I remember because the green numbers on my microwave blinked the same time my dog, Cooper, let out the lowest growl I'd ever heard. He wasn't barking at the front door. He was backing away from it. His ears were pinned flat. His tail was tucked. He kept staring at the gap beneath the door as if someone on the other side was staring back. I reached for the doorknob, then stopped. Instead, I walked to the living room window. The road outside was empty. At least, I thought it was. A second later, I noticed someone standing beneath the only working streetlight on my block. Too far away to recognize, too still to ignore. They weren't using a phone. They weren't smoking. They weren't looking around. They were simply standing there, facing my house. I reached for the porch light switch. My phone rang. No caller ID. I answered without thinking. An elderly woman's voice whispered 6 words. "Don't let them know you're awake." The line went dead. I looked back toward the streetlight. The person was gone. Not walking away, not crossing the street. Gone. I didn't sleep that night. At sunrise, I opened the front door. The folded paper was still lying exactly where I'd seen it, perfectly dry despite the morning dew. I picked it up. Blank. Completely blank. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I slipped it into my backpack. That decision changed my life, because the paper didn't come from my neighborhood. It came from a place I'd hoped never to think about again, a town called Briar's End. Three months earlier, I didn't even know Briar's End existed. Most people don't. If you search for it online, you'll find almost nothing. An outdated population count, a blurry photograph of an old welcome sign, and a handful of comments from people arguing whether the town was even real. I found it by accident. I was driving home after helping my younger cousin move into college when my truck began overheating on a lonely stretch of state highway. Steam burst from beneath the hood. The temperature gauge shot into the red. A mile later, the engine died completely. I coasted onto the shoulder. The silence that followed felt wrong. No birds, no insects, no distant traffic. Only the quiet ticking of hot metal cooling beneath the hood. I checked my phone. No signal. Figures. Nearly 40 minutes passed before an old tow truck appeared around the bend. The driver looked relieved to see me. Not surprised. Relieved. He climbed out, looked at the sky, then looked at his watch. "You broke down before sunset," he said. "That's lucky." I laughed. "Doesn't feel lucky." He didn't smile. "It is." He hooked my truck onto the tow rig without another word. As we drove, I noticed he kept checking the rear-view mirror. Not for traffic, for the road behind us. After several miles, I finally broke the silence. "Is there a motel nearby?" "It's full." "Another one?" "No." "So, where am I staying?" He hesitated, long enough to make me uncomfortable. "I know someone." Neither of us spoke for the next 15 minutes. The highway narrowed until thick pine trees crowded both sides of the road. The setting sun disappeared behind them, leaving the forest washed in deep orange shadows. Then the trees opened. A small town appeared. Brick storefronts, white churches, old pickup trucks parked along quiet streets, children riding bicycles, couples sitting on front porches. It looked peaceful, comfortably ordinary, yet something felt off. As we drove through town, every person we passed stopped what they were doing to watch the tow truck. A man paused halfway through mowing his lawn. Two kids froze in the middle of a basketball game. A woman carrying groceries stood perfectly still. No one waved. No one smiled. They simply watched us pass, as though they already knew I didn't belong there. The tow truck finally stopped outside a large white farmhouse sitting by itself at the edge of town. Flower pots lined the porch. Wind chimes swayed gently in the evening breeze. Fresh bread cooled on the kitchen windowsill. It looked like the safest house I'd ever seen. The front door opened before either of us knocked. A small, elderly woman stepped outside. Silver hair tied neatly into a bun. A blue sweater despite the summer heat. Kind eyes that somehow carried years of exhaustion. "You must be Daniel," she said. I frowned. I don't remember telling anyone my name. The tow truck driver answered without looking at me. I told her. Something about the way he said it didn't feel true. The woman smiled warmly and held out her hand. "I'm Margaret Harper, but everyone calls me Mrs. Harper." Her handshake was gentle. Her fingers were ice cold. "You'll stay here until your truck is repaired. I don't want to be a burden." "You won't." She glanced toward the darkening road before adding quietly, "We don't leave people alone after sunset." At the time, I assumed she meant coyotes or drunk drivers. Looking back, I wish I'd asked what she really meant. Dinner smelled incredible. Homemade chicken soup, fresh bread, apple pie still warm from the oven. Mrs. Harper apologized 3 different times because her Wi-Fi barely worked. She asked about my family, my hometown, my job. She laughed when I admitted the only thing I knew how to cook was scrambled eggs. For almost 2 hours, she reminded me of my grandmother. Warm, patient, the kind of person who could make a complete stranger feel like family before dessert. Then the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times. Her smile vanished. Not slowly, instantly. She stood without a word, locked every window, closed every curtain, checked every door, then checked them again. When she noticed me watching, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to worry you. Is everything okay?" "It will be." It wasn't the answer I was hoping for. Before bed, she carried a pitcher of water upstairs and showed me to the guest room. The room overlooked the road leading into town. A rocking chair sat beside the window. Everything smelled faintly of lavender. She placed the pitcher on the bedside table, then hesitated in the doorway. There was something she wanted to say. I could see it. "If you wake up tonight," she began quietly, "promise me you won't look outside." I smiled. "You mean because of the wildlife?" She didn't smile back. "No." "Then why?" She looked directly into my eyes. No matter what you hear, don't look through that window. A chill ran through me. What am I going to hear? She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped into the hallway, then looked back one last time. If someone knocks, she whispered, pretend you're asleep. She closed the door. The latch clicked. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself she was just an overly cautious old woman. Small towns always have strange traditions. Maybe this was one of them. I switched off the bedside lamp. The room fell into darkness. Outside, the last trace of daylight disappeared behind the trees. For a while, everything was perfectly quiet. Then, from somewhere far down the road, I heard footsteps. Not one pair, dozens, all walking at exactly the same pace. Slow, steady, getting closer, closer, closer. And then, every porch light in town went out at once. Darkness swallowed the town so completely, it felt unnatural. 1 second, warm yellow porch lights stretched down the street. The next, nothing. It wasn't like a power outage. The streetlights disappeared. The glow from nearby houses vanished. Even the moon seemed dimmer. Only the footsteps remained, slow, perfectly steady, like dozens of people marching to the same rhythm. I glanced at my phone. 12 a.m. No signal, no Wi-Fi, no notifications. Just silence. Mrs. Harper's warning echoed in my head. Promise me you won't look outside. I lasted less than a minute. Curiosity won. I climbed out of bed and walked toward the window. My hand hesitated on the curtain. Then I pulled it back just enough to see. The road was full of people. Not a crowd, a line. Men, women, teenagers, an elderly man walking with a cane, a young mother holding a sleeping baby, a little girl dragging a stuffed rabbit by one ear. Every one of them walked in the same direction. No one spoke. No one looked around. No one carried a flashlight. The only sound was their footsteps. I watched them pass beneath the dead streetlights, one after another. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. None of them blinked. Their eyes stayed fixed straight ahead, as though they were following something only they could see. A woman stumbled on the edge of the sidewalk. She nearly fell. The man behind her gently caught her arm, steadied her, and kept walking. Neither of them acknowledged the other. It felt rehearsed, like they'd done it 100 times before. Then I saw someone different, standing completely still across the road. He wasn't part of the line. He wasn't walking. He simply stood beneath the broken streetlight, facing the house, facing my window. There was no way he could see me through the tiny gap in the curtain, right? Slowly, he lifted one hand, not to wave, to point, directly at me. A hand clamped down on my shoulder. I almost screamed. Mrs. Harper. Her face had gone completely pale. Without saying a word, she pulled the curtain shut. You looked. I'm sorry, You looked. She wasn't angry. She sounded heartbroken, as though she'd watched something inevitable happen. She guided me away from the window and into the rocking chair. Her hands were trembling. Did he move? What? The man across the street. He pointed at me. She closed her eyes. Oh no. What does that mean? Instead of answering, she hurried downstairs. I followed despite her protests. By the time I reached the living room, she dragged the heavy dining table against the front door. Then she wedged 2 chairs beneath the doorknob. You really think someone's trying to break in? No. Then why block the door? She looked at me for a long moment. As a reminder. A reminder of what? Not to open it. The house fell silent again. Then, 3 gentle knocks echoed through the hallway. Not loud, not desperate, almost polite. The hairs on my arms stood up. Neither of us moved. Another 3 knocks, exactly the same. Then, nothing. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. Finally, footsteps drifted away from the porch. Only then did Mrs. Harper breathe again. She disappeared into a closet and returned carrying an old shotgun. The walnut stock was worn smooth from years of use. She leaned it beside the fireplace. I instinctively checked the chamber. Empty. She noticed. It isn't for them. Then why keep it? For people who panic. The answer chilled me more than if the gun had been loaded. She sat across from me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I need you to remember 3 things. I nodded. If they knock, don't answer. I won't. If they call your name, don't answer. Okay. If you hear someone you love outside, she stopped, took a slow breath. It isn't them. The room suddenly felt colder. What do you mean? I've heard my husband. She stared into the darkness. I buried him 18 years ago. I didn't know what to say. The first year after he died, he came every night. My chest tightened. You saw him? I heard him. She looked toward the blocked front door. He knew everything. My nickname, our wedding song, the promise I made him before he passed. She swallowed hard. For 3 nights, I almost opened the door. Outside, an engine echoed down the road. It was the first vehicle I'd heard since arriving. A black pickup rolled slowly past the house. No headlights, no taillights, just the quiet rumble of its engine. The line of walkers stepped aside without looking at it. The truck stopped directly in front of the farmhouse. Its engine idled. No one got out. No doors opened. After nearly a minute, it drove away. The walkers closed the gap and continued as though nothing had happened. Mrs. Harper whispered something so quietly, I almost missed it. They're counting. Who's counting? She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the front door and rested her ear against it. Listening, not looking, listening. Then she frowned. They skipped us. What? They always stop. Before I could ask what she meant, something slid beneath the front door. A folded white paper. It moved slowly across the wooden floor, as if invisible fingers were pushing it from the other side. It stopped in the center of the hallway. Neither of us touched it. Mrs. Harper stared at it for nearly a full minute. Then, with shaking hands, she picked it up. She unfolded it. Her shoulders relaxed. It's blank. She let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. We're all right. I looked over her shoulder. The paper was completely empty. No name? She shook her head. No name. So, that's good? It's the best thing that could have happened. She folded the paper again and carried it into the kitchen. Instead of throwing it away, she opened an old cookie tin. Inside were dozens of identical folded papers, maybe hundreds, each one carefully dated. She placed the new one on top and quietly closed the lid. You've kept every single one? She nodded. They remind me. Of what? She rested one hand on the tin. That we were allowed one more day. A lump formed in my throat. At exactly 12:17 a.m., every footstep outside stopped, all at once. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. Then, from somewhere just beyond the front window, I heard someone laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It sounded almost friendly. And somehow, that made it infinitely worse. The laugh lasted only a second. Soft, almost amused. Then it was gone. Mrs. Harper blew out the candle on the kitchen table. The house disappeared into darkness. She grabbed my wrist. Don't move. A few seconds later, the laugh came again. This time from the backyard. Then from the side of the house. Then from the porch. My pulse quickened. No one could move around the house that fast. Cooper stood from beneath the table and growled toward the hallway. The growl quickly turned into a frightened whine. He crawled back under the table, pressed himself against the wall, and refused to come out. I'd never seen a dog act like that. We waited in complete silence. Then someone slowly dragged a finger down the front door, from the very top, all the way to the floor. The wood groaned beneath the pressure, not scratching, just sliding. When the sound reached the bottom, 3 gentle knocks followed. Tap, tap, tap. Mrs. Harper shut her eyes. They know you're awake. Because I looked. She nodded. It only takes once. Before I could ask another question, the old grandfather clock in the hallway began chiming. 1, 2, 3. It should have stopped at 12. It didn't. 13, 14, 15. Each chime sounded deeper than the last, older, as if the clock itself were wearing out with every strike. Mrs. Harper hurried into the hallway. She opened the glass door of the clock. The pendulum wasn't moving. The hands were frozen at exactly 12:17. Yet the bell continued ringing. 20, 21, 22. Then, without warning, it stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable. A second later, every light in the house flashed once. Only once. When the darkness settled again, a silhouette stood outside the front window, close enough that I could see the outline of a hat, broad shoulders, one arm hanging unnaturally still. It never moved. It never knocked. It simply stood there, watching. Mrs. Harper, don't acknowledge it. We waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Maybe longer. Then, the silhouette was gone. No footsteps, no door closing, nothing. It was simply gone. Neither of us slept. When sunrise finally arrived, it felt impossible that the same town could exist. Birds chirped. Children rode bicycles. Someone waved while walking a dog. The bakery smelled of fresh bread. It looked like the safest town in America. Mrs. Harper served pancakes without mentioning the night before. Eventually, I broke the silence. What are the papers? She kept spreading butter across her toast. I don't know. Who delivers them? I don't know. The Walkers? I don't know. You've lived here for over 30 years. 34. And you've never tried to find out? That made her stop eating. I did. Her voice became almost too quiet to hear. It cost me my son. She walked to an old cabinet and removed a faded family photograph. A smiling teenage boy stood between her and a man I assumed was her husband. He couldn't have been older than 16. His name was Ethan. She gently traced his face with one finger. He thought the town was lying. What happened? He stayed awake. My stomach tightened. He followed the walkers. I already knew how the story ended, or at least I thought I did. They found him 3 days later. Was he hurt? She slowly shook her head. No. He remembered his birthday. He remembered every teacher he'd ever had. He remembered his favorite baseball team. Tears filled her eyes. But when I hugged him, he asked why a stranger was touching him. The room felt unbearably quiet. He never remembered us again. She returned the photograph to the cabinet. 6 months later, another paper arrived. This one had our last name on it. What happened? He opened the front door before sunrise. Did anyone see him leave? No. Did he ever come back? Mrs. Harper looked toward the window. Not that time. Later that afternoon, the mechanic called. My truck would be ready the next day. I should have been relieved. Instead, I found myself checking the clock every few minutes, watching the sun sink lower, listening to conversations stop whenever I walked into a room. By evening, I couldn't stand sitting in the house any longer. I walked into town. The diner was nearly full. The waitress quietly placed a slice of apple pie in front of me. On the house. I thanked her, then asked the one question everyone avoided. Has anyone ever left Briar's End after receiving a paper with their name on it? The room went silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Coffee cups froze in midair. Even the jukebox suddenly seemed too loud. An elderly man in a denim jacket stood from a corner booth and slowly walked over. He sat across from me. Without saying a word, he rolled up his left sleeve. Burned into the inside of his forearm was a perfect white square, the exact shape of the folded papers. I left, he said quietly. I leaned forward. You escaped? He smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. No. I was allowed to leave. The distinction sent a chill through me. What does that mean? Before he could answer, everyone in the diner looked toward the front window at exactly the same moment. No one pointed. No one spoke. They all just looked. Outside, a folded white paper slid across the empty street. There was no wind, yet it moved in a perfectly straight line. It stopped directly in front of the diner door. Nobody moved. The waitress quietly reached beneath the counter and switched off the open sign. The room grew darker. The front door slowly creaked open by itself. The folded paper slid inside, across the wooden floor, past one table, then another, until it stopped beside a little girl eating grilled cheese with her mother. She looked down, then up at her mother. It's not mine. Her mother gently squeezed her shoulder. I know. The paper waited. Then it began moving again. Slowly, patiently, as if it were searching. It passed another booth, then another. Finally, it stopped beside an elderly mailman sitting alone near the window. He stared at it for a long time. So, he whispered, it finally caught up. He bent down with trembling hands. picked up the paper, opened it. His shoulders sagged. He folded it again without letting anyone else see what was written inside. Then he stood, left a few bills beside his coffee cup, nodded politely to the waitress, and quietly walked out of the diner. Nobody stopped him. Nobody called after him. I rushed to the window. Instead of heading home, he walked toward the north road, the same road the walkers had taken the night before. He never hesitated. Within a minute, the trees swallowed him. I turned back to everyone else. Why didn't anyone stop him? The old man looked at me with tired eyes. Because it wouldn't change anything. What do you mean? Once you've seen your name, you're already walking. No one in the diner argued. No one even looked surprised. They simply picked up their forks and continued eating in silence. For them, this was just another Tuesday. I left the diner just before sunset. The streets were quiet again. Children laughed in their front yards. A teenager washed his father's truck. An elderly couple watered flowers on their porch. If I hadn't spent the previous night staring at silent walkers and folded papers, I would have believed Briar's End was the safest town I'd ever visited. Halfway back to Mrs. Harper's house, something caught my eye. Every home had a small iron hook mounted beside the front door. Most of them were empty, but every few houses, one held a neatly folded white paper. No one touched them. People walked past them the way you'd walk past a mailbox, as if they belonged there. One family was loading furniture into the back of a pickup truck. Suitcases, boxes, a bicycle tied down with rope. They were leaving, or at least trying to. The father climbed into the driver's seat. The engine started. The truck pulled away. I watched it disappear around the bend. Less than a minute later, the same truck slowly drove back into town from the opposite direction. The father slammed on the brakes. His wife covered her mouth. The children didn't even seem surprised. He turned the truck around, drove the other direction. 5 minutes later, it came back again. This time, he didn't even look confused. He simply parked in front of his house, climbed out, and stared at the folded paper hanging from the iron hook. After nearly a minute, he took it down, opened it, closed his eyes, folded it again, then quietly slipped it into his shirt pocket. Without saying a word, the entire family carried every box back inside. Nobody cried, nobody argued. It looked like they'd accepted something they had always known would happen. The old man from the diner had been right. Some people weren't trapped. They were being kept. That evening, Mrs. Harper made tomato soup. Neither of us ate much. Finally, she looked at me. "You saw someone receive one?" "The mailman." She nodded. "His wife got hers last winter." "What happened to her?" "She disappeared." "And came back?" 3 days later." "The same?" Mrs. Harper stared into her bowl. "Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and realized they were remembering somewhere you've never been?" I didn't answer. "That's how she looked." Before I could ask another question, someone knocked on the back door. One knock, just one. Mrs. Harper froze. "So soon," she whispered. She slowly walked toward the kitchen window but stayed several feet away from the glass. I stepped beside her. Standing at the edge of the backyard was a teenage boy, barefoot. His jeans were caked in dried mud. His gray hoodie was torn at one sleeve. He wasn't facing the house. He stood with his back toward us, perfectly still. Then, without turning around, He spoke. "Mom." Mrs. Harper collapsed into the nearest chair. I looked at her, then back toward the yard. "Ethan?" She nodded through tears. Outside, the boy smiled. I could hear it in his voice. "I finally remembered the way home." Mrs. Harper covered her mouth to keep from crying out. "Ethan," she whispered. The boy never turned around, not once. Instead, he quietly asked, "Do you still leave the porch light on?" Mrs. Harper squeezed her eyes shut. "No." "Good." His smile faded. "They don't like the light." A cold shiver ran through me. He sounded exactly like a son speaking to his mother. Not possessed, not angry, just sad. "Ethan," I called, "can you turn around?" Several long seconds passed. Finally, he answered, "I don't know how." Those 5 words hit harder than anything I'd heard since arriving in town. Mrs. Harper stood on trembling legs. Every instinct in me screamed to stop her. She took one slow step toward the back door, then another. She reached for the handle. "No," I whispered. She stopped. Tears streamed down her face. "My boy." Outside, Ethan lowered his head. "If you open it," he said quietly, "I'll come inside." Hope flashed across Mrs. Harper's face. Then Ethan continued, "And you'll never leave again." The hope disappeared instantly. He wasn't asking to come home. He was warning her. Mrs. Harper slowly took her hand off the doorknob. "I love you," she whispered. For the first time, Ethan's voice cracked. "I know." Then he walked away, not toward the road, not deeper into town, straight into the forest. He never looked back. Mrs. Harper slid to the floor and cried harder than anyone I've ever seen. Neither of us slept. Just before sunrise, someone slid another folded paper beneath the front door. It stopped at Mrs. Harper's feet. She stared at it for a long time before finally unfolding it. This time, it wasn't blank. She read the single word written inside. Her hands began shaking. She quietly folded it again, slipped it into her sweater pocket. "What does it say?" She forced a smile. "It's nothing." I knew she was lying. An hour later, while she was hanging laundry outside, I found the paper resting on the kitchen table. I told myself not to look. I picked it up anyway. Inside, there was only one word: Harper. At that exact moment, I heard the back door slam. Mrs. Harper was standing in the yard, looking straight at me through the kitchen window. She didn't look angry. She looked defeated. Very slowly, she closed her eyes. Then she whispered 6 words I could read from her lips. "They finally remembered my name." I ran outside. "Mrs. Harper!" She didn't answer. She was still looking at me, but it felt like she was seeing someone far behind me. When I reached her, she gently took the folded paper from my hand. "You weren't supposed to read it." "I'm sorry." She smiled. "It's all right." Her voice was calm, too calm. The first time is always an accident. "What happens now?" She looked toward the tree line. "They'll come tonight." "We'll leave before then." She slowly shook her head. "I've tried. The roads won't let me." "Then we'll walk." "I've tried that too." "There has to be a way." "There is." For the first time since I'd met her, she smiled without fear. But it isn't mine. The mechanic called just after noon. My truck was finally repaired. I packed my backpack as fast as I could. Mrs. Harper helped me carry my things to the porch. She pressed the old cookie tin into my hands, the one filled with decades of blank papers. "I can't take this." "You have to." "Why?" "Because someone warned me." She glanced at the road. "Now it's your turn." Before I could ask what she meant, she hugged me. It felt exactly like my grandmother's hugs when I was a kid. Warm, safe, final. "Don't come back after dark," she whispered. "They'll think you've chosen to stay." The truck started on the first try. For the first time since arriving in Briar's End, the highway didn't loop. The welcome sign disappeared in my rearview mirror. 5 miles. 10. 20. The town never came back. I actually laughed. I thought I'd made it. Then my phone rang. No caller ID. I already knew who it was. I answered anyway. Mrs. Harper spoke before I could. "Daniel." Her voice sounded distant, almost underwater. "Whatever you hear tonight, don't answer the door." The line went dead. I drove straight home. 6 hours. No stops, no detours, no strange roads. When I finally pulled into my driveway, Cooper burst through the front door and nearly knocked me over. For the first time in days, I felt safe. I unpacked my bag, set the cookie tin on a shelf in my closet, and promised myself I would never speak about Briar's End again. 2 months later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not folded, just a handwritten note. "Mrs. Harper returned this morning. She remembers the town. She remembers the walkers. She remembers the papers. She doesn't remember you." There was no signature. I never found out who mailed it. Life slowly returned to normal. Months passed. The nightmares became less frequent. Cooper stopped growling at empty rooms. I stopped waking up at 12:17 every night. Eventually, I convinced myself the worst was over. Until last Tuesday. I came home after work just before sunset. Something was tucked beneath my welcome mat. A perfectly folded white sheet of paper. My hands immediately started shaking. I didn't touch it. Not for several minutes. Finally, I picked it up. Locked every door, closed every curtain, turned on every light in the house. Then I unfolded it. Blank. Completely blank. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I wanted to believe it meant nothing. Then I remembered Mrs. Harper holding the old papers beneath the morning sunlight. I carried it to the kitchen window, tilted it toward the light. Slowly, faint indentations appeared. Not ink, just the impression left by words written on the sheet that had once rested above it. There were only 7 words. "Thank you for remembering the rules." I stared at them until the sun disappeared. That's when Cooper began growling. I looked outside. Across the street, my new neighbor was unloading boxes from a moving truck. A young couple, maybe in their early 30s. They smiled and waved. I smiled back. Then I saw it. Resting neatly beneath their front door was a perfectly folded white paper. For a moment, I considered pretending I hadn't seen it. Walking back inside, locking my door, forgetting everything. Instead, I crossed the street. The husband reached for another box. "Hey," he said with a smile. "You live nearby?" "I do. We just moved in." I nodded. "I know." He laughed. "We're excited. Quiet neighborhood." I looked past him. The folded paper was still waiting beneath his door, exactly the way mine had. Exactly the way Mrs. Harper's had. I wanted to tell him everything. About Briar's End, about the walkers, about the papers, about never opening the door after midnight. But I already knew he wouldn't believe me. I hadn't believed Mrs. Harper, so I settled for the only warning that had ever mattered. "If you hear someone knocking tonight..." I paused. He smiled politely. "Pretend you're asleep." He laughed, the same awkward laugh I'd given Mrs. Harper. "That's oddly specific." "It is." He thanked me anyway. I walked back across the street, halfway to my house. I looked at my watch. 11:56 p.m. I frowned. That couldn't be right. The sun had just set. I looked up. Every porch light on the street went out at exactly the same time, one after another. No, not one after another, all at once. Cooper began barking inside my house. Somewhere down the block, I heard footsteps. Not one pair, dozens. Slow, steady, getting closer. I didn't run. I didn't look toward the sound. I unlocked my front door, stepped inside, locked it behind me, closed every curtain, turned off every light. Then I sat in complete darkness, listening. At exactly 12:17 a.m., someone knocked. 3 soft knocks. Tap, tap, tap. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I smiled. Because this time, I knew the rules. I never answered the door.